I myself am a devotee of silence. That is why I always choose to camp alone in the winter, when the familiar trails have been frozen and covered with snow, making every trace of the civilized world disappear. This time I chose a secluded spot deep within the Montana National Forest, where temperatures could drop to -15 degrees Celsius at night. The snow was more than half a meter deep. I had pitched my tent, built a fire, and prepared everything necessary to survive for 3 days. The feeling of warmth and safety when curled up in a sleeping bag just inches away from the tent's cold wall was a peace that no city could ever provide. The first night passed without incident. On the second night, everything changed. I woke up around 2 a.m., not because of the cold, but because of a sound. At first, I thought it was an owl or the wind, but as I listened more carefully, the blood in my veins turned to ice. It was a scream. A frantic, desperate woman's scream. "Help me, please, it's so cold here." The voice echoed from the dry creek bed to the north, about 300 yards from my position. It wasn't a short cry that ceased, but a prolonged moan, tearing through the deep forest stillness. My conscience was torn. The wilderness in winter is the most dangerous place, and any rescue attempt could be a trap, but the voice was too real, too painful. I lay still in my sleeping bag for about 5 minutes, convincing myself that it could be a cold-induced hallucination or an injured fox. Then the scream repeated, "Help me, please, it's so cold here." This time I was forced to act. I quickly put on my thick jacket and tied my boots. I didn't have a phone as there was no signal here. I grabbed my large flashlight and my bushcraft knife. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make any sound other than the crunch of snow beneath my boot soles. As I ventured deeper into the snowy forest, my steps became more cautious. The closer I got to the source of the sound, a chilling sensation crawled up my spine. I had heard this cry for help several times in the past few minutes, and I began to notice an anomaly. Every scream, every word was identical. The same pitch, the same shortness of breath, the same brief moment of silence before the plea ended. It was too perfect. Someone who was truly desperate wouldn't be able to maintain such precise repetition. I had read about hunters in the deep woods, those who use false sounds to lure kind-hearted campers out of their hiding spots. My heart pounded as I knelt near a large, snow-covered pine tree. The cry for help rang out again, but now it was very loud, very close. I turned off my flashlight, letting my eyes adjust to the faint moonlight filtering through the branches. I crawled close to the ground, fumbling toward the base of the tree. Right beneath a large clump of roots, I saw it. It was an old cassette player, a 90s-era recorder, wrapped tightly in black waterproof tape. It was connected to a small battery and a tiny horn speaker pointed skyward. That agonizing sound, the cry of someone in distress, was actually just a rough, continuous audio loop recorded and played back. The chill was no longer simple fear, it was pure horror. I was not the rescuer, I was the prey that had taken the bait. I was standing right in the center of the trap. I slowly turned my head to look around. My breathing stopped. Right under this tree where I was kneeling, the layer of snow had a distinct line of disturbance. Not a footprint, but an artificial ridge. I carefully reached out and felt it. The snow on top was thin and soft, but underneath was a crudely covered, taut canvas. It was a hole, a pit camouflaged with snow and dry leaves, deep enough to break my leg or trap me. The predator had set the bait in the physical trap, and now he was waiting. He didn't need to know if I had fallen into the trap or not. He only needed to know that I had left my tent. I backed away, the feeling of being watched and aching pain at the back of my neck. I knew he was somewhere in the darkness, perhaps on a rock ledge or behind a tree a few hundred yards away, looking straight at his trap through binoculars. He was patient. He had waited a long time for a lone prey on a winter night. The only option was to disappear into the darkness, making him lose track of me. I carefully pulled the cassette player out from the roots. I threw it as hard as I could in the opposite direction, towards an open space where there were no trees. The machine hit a rock and made a small but sharp sound, then continued to emit the desperate cry for help. It was then that I heard the sound of a dry branch breaking. The sound came from the west. It was the unmistakable sound of someone moving quickly and heavily. The predator had reacted to the false noise. He was moving in that direction. I turned my back on the sound and started to run. Not a sprint, but a sideways run, running in a Z-pattern, trying to use the large tree trunks as cover from the predator's view. I did not turn on my flashlight. The deep snow made every step heavy and slow. My lungs felt like they were burning. The biting cold overwhelmed even the fear. I couldn't collapse or I would die of hypothermia before he found me. I ran without a destination, just running away from the direction of my tent and the direction of the predator. I realized I was heading towards the Conservation Service road where I had parked my truck. I sped up. Behind me, the cassette player was still emitting the cry for help, but it was getting fainter. I no longer heard any other footsteps, but the sudden silence was more terrifying than any sound. He might have realized the trick. He might have turned back and was now tracking my footprints in the snow. Every step was a silent prayer. Finally, I saw a light. It was the yellow headlight of a snowplow operating early on the main conservation road. I burst out of the woods, stumbled, and then got up again. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The snowplow stopped. The driver was an old man. He looked at me with an astonished and skeptical expression as I rushed to his window, coatless, knife in hand. I couldn't say anything except to point toward the forest and try to regulate my breathing. Someone in the woods, trap. Heard a fake cry for help I managed to utter. The driver didn't believe me immediately, but my panic convinced him. He radioed the patrol team. The police found it at dawn. My tent was slashed, the sleeping bag was ripped open, and all my belongings were destroyed. But there was no sign of the predator other than a few large and unfamiliar boot prints in the snow. The cassette player was gone. I survived, but I lost my silence. To this day, whenever night falls and the space becomes too quiet, I hear that false cry for help in my head. I know that somewhere out there, the predator continues to set new traps, waiting for another solitary prey. Lake Michigan in February is not a lake, it is a desert. A white, rock-hard desert stretching to the horizon where the gray sky devours the land. The air here is so cold that every inhalation is like swallowing tiny shards of glass. Laura and I drove up here from Chicago. We were young, foolish, and in love. We thought we were invincible. She wanted the feeling of standing on the edge of the world where there were no skyscrapers, no car horns, just absolute silence. We parked on the edge of the snow-covered trail. The ranger at the station had warned about a low-pressure system moving in, but the sky was still a deceiving pale blue then. We laughed and strapped the cross-country skis to our feet. We skied away from the shore. The ice beneath the snow was thick and solid. The only sound was the swish of our skis and our breathing. Laura skied about 20 meters ahead of me. Her bright yellow jacket was the only spot of color in this monochrome world. Everything changed faster than I could imagine. First came the wind. The temperature dropped instantly. The sky turned a heavy, leaden color, and then the snow started to fall. A thick white curtain descended, blurring the boundary between sky and ground. My visibility dropped from infinite to a few meters, then down to arm's length. I stopped, squinting to try and peer through the storm. Laura's yellow jacket was gone. I called her name. My voice was torn apart by the wind as soon as it left my mouth. I pushed hard with my poles, trying to move faster forward in the direction she had gone. My heart began to pound, a primal fear creeping into my gut. I skied for about 5 minutes, or perhaps 10. Time became distorted in the whiteout. I started to think I had gone off course. I started to think I had skied past her. Then I saw it. 2 ski poles stuck upright in the snow, crossed to form an X. A pair of ski poles lay next to them. I skied up to it, gasping for breath. They were Laura's skis. I looked around. There was no one, only the screaming blizzard. I bent down. I saw her footprints. Laura had taken her skis off. Her boot prints were clearly imprinted on the fresh snow. She had walked. I followed the tracks. They led about 10 meters away from the pile of skis, heading deeper onto the lake surface. I walked, my eyes glued to the ground, afraid that if I looked up I would lose the trail. 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps. And then I stopped. I stood there blinking, trying to comprehend what my brain was telling me. The footprints ended. They hadn't been filled with snow, they hadn't faded, they simply stopped, clear, sharp. The right boot print was pressed deep into the snow, the toe pointing forward, and after that, nothing. Ahead was only the flat, pristine snow surface. There was no sign of a fall, no hole in the ice. The ice here was a meter thick, enough to hold a truck. No sign of a struggle, no other footprints turning back. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air at that very spot. I knelt down, I touched the last footprint. It was real. I looked up at the sky, a crazy thought flashing that something had lifted her up, but there was only cloud and snow. I started screaming. I ran around the area, widening the search circle. I stomped my feet on the ice to check its firmness. It was hard as concrete. She couldn't have gone anywhere. She had to be here. The panic turned into a cold frenzy. I ran until my lungs burned. I thought I saw a yellow shape in the distance, but when I reached it, it was only an illusion of snow and wind. I heard her laugh, but it was just the wind whistling through my hood. The cold began to invade me. My fingers went numb. My thoughts became sluggish, like thickening honey. I returned to the spot where the footprints abruptly ended. The sheer irrationality of it was the most terrifying thing, but finding nothing, seeing a path end in a void, shattered my reality. I sat down next to Laura's last footprint. I felt sleepy. A strange warmth began to spread through my chest, a deadly sign of hypothermia. I closed my eyes. The white world faded to black. I opened my eyes to blinding sunlight. I squinted, raising my hand to shield my face. My hand touched something soft and damp, grass. I sat up abruptly. My head was spinning as if I had just stepped off a high-speed carousel. I was not on the lake, I was in the middle of a vibrant green meadow. The sun was shining fiercely overhead. The air was warm, carrying the smell of earth and pollen. I looked down at myself. I was wearing my ski clothes, but they were filthy, torn, and faded. I ran a hand over my face. A beard, a long, thick, and matted beard reached my chest. I tried to stand, but my legs were shaky and weak. I fell. What was happening? I was just on the lake. Laura had just vanished. The blizzard had just hit. I crawled to a nearby puddle to drink. The reflection in the water made me recoil. A wild, gaunt man with deeply sunken eyes stared back at me. It was me, but much older. I found a small backpack beside me. It was not mine. I opened it. Inside were maps of places I had never heard of, a few crumpled pieces of change and empty tin cans. I staggered toward the asphalt road in the distance. A truck drove by and stopped. The driver looked at me with suspicion but also pity. I asked him where I was. Pittsfield, Massachusetts. More than 700 miles from Lake Michigan. I asked him the date. He looked at me strangely and replied, it was May 5, 1979. 15 months. The police arrived. They confirmed my identity through fingerprints. They said I had been declared legally dead. They said the search for me and Laura was called off after 2 weeks. They said I was a miracle. I was brought back to Chicago. My family cried, hugging me fiercely. Doctors examined my brain. They called it a dissociative fugue state. They said the psychological shock on the lake that day caused my mind to shut down to protect itself. I had wandered off, lived another life, another identity for those 15 months, and then suddenly snapped out of it. But the memory of those 15 months was a blank page, completely empty. I didn't know what I ate, where I slept, or who I had been. But that is not what keeps me up at night. What haunts me is Laura. They never found her, not a trace, not a piece of cloth, only the crossed skis and the footprints that stopped in the middle of the ice. The police asked me many times. Their tone shifted from compassionate to suspicious. Do you remember anything? Are you sure you don't remember anything? Are you sure she just vanished? They didn't say it, but I heard the real question in their eyes. What did you do to her? And the real horror, the one that makes me break out in a cold sweat every time I close my eyes, is that I ask myself that too. That 15-month gap, what did it contain? Were the footprints ending in the middle of the ice the truth, or was it something my damaged brain fabricated, a delusion to cover up a more brutal truth, that I harmed her in that blizzard, that I hid her away? And then I ran, not just from the scene, but from myself, so far that I forgot who I was for over a year. I live alone now. I cannot stand to see the suspicion in other people's eyes. I spend my days staring at maps, trying to trace the journey I don't remember. But every night in my dreams, I find myself on that lake's surface again. The wind screams. I follow the footprints. They lead farther and farther away. And in the dream, they do not stop. They lead to a bottomless black hole, and standing beside that hole is me, with an expressionless face, looking down into the eternal darkness. I wake up gasping, my heart hammering in my chest. I look at my hands in the dim light of the night lamp, the hands of a survivor or the hands of a killer. I will never know, and that not knowing, that is the coldest prison, more eternal than the frozen lake of long ago. I had driven for over 6 hours to get here, a forgotten corner of the northern wilderness where maps were nothing more than vague, dashed lines. The purpose of this trip was simple. I was seeking solitude. No phone signal, no car horns, just me and nature in its perpetual hibernation. My pickup truck was parked at the edge of the woods, about 2 miles walk from the location I chose for my camp. I hoisted the heavy backpack onto my shoulders, feeling the thick snow crunch beneath the soles of my specialized boots. The temperature was minus 15 degrees Celsius. The air was dry and razor sharp. Every inhalation made my lungs numb. I chose a flat patch of ground nestled behind old pine trees facing the lake. This was an ideal spot to block the wind. The setup process took place in absolute silence. I stomped down the snow to create a hard base, laid out the thermal mat, and erected the dark orange four-season tent. It was my fortress tonight, a fortress made of nylon and polyester, less than a millimeter thick. When the sun set, darkness swallowed everything at a dizzying speed. I crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, leaving the wilderness outside. The light from the hanging lantern emitted a warm yellow glow, creating an illusion of safety. I cooked a simple dinner on my mini gas stove, the steam fogging up the ventilation mesh. After eating, I cleaned up thoroughly to avoid attracting wild animals, then crawled into my 0-degree rated sleeping bag. I lay listening to the wind whistling through the pine tops. Occasionally, there was the crackle of a dry branch breaking under the weight of the snow. These were normal sounds in this place. I closed my eyes, relaxed my body, and savored the feeling of being enclosed. Sleep came to me slowly and heavily. I woke up. The space was pitch black. The tent light had long been off. I lay still, trying to figure out what had woken me. The luminous watch on my wrist read 2 a.m. The silence outside was unusual. The wind had stopped blowing. There was no more sound of trees or branches colliding, only a stillness pressing heavily on my chest. Then I heard it. Footsteps. It wasn't the light footfall of a fox or the frantic scampering of a rabbit. They were heavy, slow, and deliberate footsteps. The soles of boots grinding down on the hard snow created a crisp, dry crunching sound. It was walking towards my tent. The blood in my veins seemed to freeze. I held my breath, my right hand instinctively reaching for the folding knife I kept in the mesh pocket on the side of the tent. Who could be here at this hour? The nearest human settlement was 50 miles away. There were no other campsites. I had checked thoroughly when I arrived. The footsteps stopped right next to the tent wall on my left, where my head was lying. The distance between me and the stranger was only a thin layer of canvas. I could hear his breathing, heavy, wheezing breaths as if he had a stuffed nose or was trying to suppress excitement. I dared not move. I waited for a call, a greeting, or any sign of a civilized interaction. But no, a sharp sound rang out, the sound of metal slicing into taut fabric. A long blade pierced the tent wall, about 10 centimeters above my shoulder. The cold moonlight streamed through the newly created slit, illuminating the glistening steel edge. I rolled to the right on survival instinct, just as the blade slashed violently downwards in a long stroke, ripping open my makeshift home. The attacker did not utter a single word. He pulled the knife out and stabbed down again, this time lower, aiming directly for the spot where I had just been lying. He couldn't see me. He was stabbing blindly, stabbing in a cold frenzy. I screamed, a hoarse sound of sheer terror. I kicked out of the sleeping bag, scrambling to escape. The main tent door at my feet was still zipped shut. I didn't have time to unzip it. The blade pierced the tent roof again, grazing my biceps, leaving a burning cut. There was no other choice. I turned, using my small folding knife to forcefully slash the tent wall on the opposite side. The fabric tore. I lunged headfirst through the gap, landing face down on the freezing snow. I wasn't wearing shoes, no jacket, only my thin thermal underwear. The -20-degree cold hit my body like 1,000 needles, but the adrenaline surging through my blood prevented immediate pain. I scrambled to my feet, turning to look back. In the stark moonlight, I saw his silhouette, a tall man dressed head to toe in black snow gear. He wore a tightly pulled hood with a headlamp on his forehead, but it was switched off. He was standing next to my shredded tent, holding a long-bladed bushcraft knife. He turned his head toward me. I couldn't see his face, only a dark void beneath the brim of his hood. He didn't rush to attack. He walked slowly, silently, his boots kicking away chunks of snow in his path. He knew I couldn't run far in this state. I spun around and started to run. The woods were my only hope. If I ran onto the lake, I would be a clear moving target against the white snow. In the woods, the darkness and trees could shield me. My bare feet were in direct contact with the icy snow. The first sensation was burning, followed by numbness. Dry branches hidden beneath the snow cut into my skin, but I didn't dare stop to check. I ran zigzagging through the black pine trunks. My breath turned into billowing white clouds, betraying my position to the predator behind me. I glanced back. He was still following. He turned on his headlamp. A cold, white beam of light swept through the trees, searching for his prey's shadow. He wasn't running. He was taking long, confident strides. He knew this terrain well, or he was an expert hunter. I needed to lose him. Ahead was a small slope leading down to a dry creek bed. I slid down, my tailbone hitting a submerged rock beneath the snow. A sharp pain shot through my coccyx, but I gritted my teeth. I rolled into an eroded hollow beneath the roots of a fallen old oak. I curled up, trying to make myself as small as possible. Snow covered me, freezing me to the core. I clamped my hand tightly over my mouth and nose, trying to suppress my ragged breathing. My heart was pounding so loudly I feared the sound would echo in the stillness. The beam of the flashlight swept over my head. His footsteps stopped right at the edge of the slope. He was standing there, directly above my hiding spot. I heard the rustle of his pants as he bent down or turned around. The silence lasted an eternity. Then he started whistling, an eerie, disjointed, and hollow tune. It wasn't a cheerful song, it sounded more like the mating call of a wild animal. He started walking down the slope. He was heading toward the tree hollow. He knew I was here, or he was checking every potential hiding place. I gripped the folding knife in my hand. The blade was less than 10 centimeters long, tiny compared to his bushcraft knife, but it was all I had. The flashlight beam shone directly onto the thicket next to me. Then it moved slowly to the left, illuminating the fallen tree trunk. In just a few more seconds, that light would hit my face. I couldn't just lie there and wait to die. The moment the light grazed my boots, I yelled out, gathering momentum, and lunged out of my hiding spot. He flinched, the light beam wavering. I didn't run away, I charged straight at him. That was the last thing he expected. He thought the prey would continue to flee in panic. I plunged my folding knife hard into his left thigh, where the fabric of his pants seemed thinnest. The sensation of the blade sinking into flesh made me shudder. He roared in pain, swinging his left arm and punching me hard in the face. The blow struck my cheekbone, stunning me and sending me sprawling backward. Blood gushed from my nose, warm and flowing onto my lips. He staggered back, clutching his thigh. My knife was still stuck there. I had lost my weapon. But he was also wounded. He dropped to one knee, the bushcraft knife in his right hand waving erratically in defense. I grabbed a handful of snow and small stones, threw them hard into his face, and turned to run back up the slope. This time I didn't run into the woods. I ran toward the trail leading to my parked truck. I don't know how long I ran. My feet were completely numb. I no longer felt the ground. I was moving purely by instinct, like two logs attached to my hips. Behind me, the sound of pursuing footsteps had stopped. Perhaps the wound in his thigh kept him at bay, or he decided not to risk a chase while injured. But I didn't dare look back. The fear that his face would appear right behind me propelled me forward. My body began to shake violently. It was a sign of the early stages of hypothermia. My vision started to blur, narrowing like a tunnel. The trees on both sides of the road transformed into twisted ghosts. I stumbled and fell. The fall left me lying face down in the snow. A wave of drowsiness washed over me, a sweet temptation. The snow suddenly felt strangely soft and warm. My mind whispered that if I just closed my eyes for a moment, all the pain would disappear. No. The image of the blade ripping through the tent wall flashed in my mind. The sound of tearing fabric, the brutal violation of the safest space. I bit down hard on my tongue. The metallic taste of blood and the sharp pain helped to snap me back to alertness. I crawled on all fours. My 10 fingers clung to the snow, dragging my heavy body along. A faint light appeared in the distance. It was not a hallucination. It was the reflection from a traffic sign by the roadside. I had reached the road. I struggled to stand one last time, staggering out onto the dark asphalt surface. No cars were passing. The road was deserted. I shuffled toward my pickup truck, parked about 500 meters away. Every step was an agony. When I finally touched the cold door handle of the truck, I realized I didn't have the keys. The car keys were in my jeans pocket, and those jeans were inside the shredded tent in the woods. I collapsed against the car window, weeping. My hot tears quickly turned ice cold on my cheeks. I looked around. I picked up a large rock by the roadside. I smashed the rear passenger side window. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the night. I climbed into the car, pushing the shards of glass aside. I found the spare blanket kept in the back seat and wrapped myself tightly. I couldn't start the engine for heat. I could only curl up under the blanket, waiting for dawn or a patrol car to pass by. I locked the car doors from the inside. My eyes were fixed on the edge of the forest where I had just escaped. In the dim light of dawn, I saw a black silhouette standing silently at the edge of the woods, right on the boundary between the trees and the road. He stood there motionless. His headlamp was off. He just stood watching me. We looked at each other through the broken car glass and the cold space. Then he slowly turned his back, limped away, and vanished into the eternal night of the forest. I survived. But even now, whenever I lie in my bedroom, I never dare to turn off the light. And I can never tolerate the sound of fabric being torn, not even the opening of a package or the fluttering of curtains in the wind. Because that sound always reminds me of the night when the boundary between life and death was as thin as a layer of tent fabric. My mother has been missing for 24 hours. The house is morbidly quiet. Her herbal teacup is still on the kitchen counter next to the open calendar. The tea has gone cold, the mint leaves sunken to the bottom like a shipwreck. The wool shawl she always wore is draped over the back of the chair, still retaining the shape of her body. Everything is in its place except her. I've paced the living room so many times that the old Persian rug has a visible wear path. The police came. They asked questions I didn't have answers to. Was she depressed? I don't know. Was she forgetful? Sometimes. Did she leave a note? No. They took notes in their pads, their faces grim, promising to call if they got any news. They asked me about the car. A dark blue sedan, old model, but ran well. She took the car and the keys. That is all we know. I looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall, small, dry flakes swirling in the gray air. This town, St. Clair, is all she ever knew. Where could she have gone? My phone vibrated on the table, the sound making me jump. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered. It was the police, a weary voice on the other end. They had pinged her cell phone signal. A weak signal, only 1 bar, but it was working. The last signal was recorded an hour ago, near the public pier area. The officer said they would send a patrol car out there when they could, but the snow was starting to get heavy. I hung up. The public pier, in the summer, that place was laughter and the smell of sunscreen. We spent our childhoods there, jumping into the warm water, but in the winter it's a different place. It's abandoned. The town fences it off after Thanksgiving, as they do every year. I couldn't wait. I couldn't sit in this house for another second, staring at her cold cup of tea. I grabbed my car keys. The road to the pier was deserted. No one clears the snow here. Streetlights struggled to pierce through the falling snow, creating ghostly halos of light. My car was the only thing moving in town. I parked a distance from the gate. The wind from the frozen lake rattled my car, making it tremble slightly. I turned off the engine. The silence rushed in. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The barrier blocking the pier entrance, the orange metal fence, had been knocked down. One of its posts was bent, twisted like a broken branch. Someone had driven through here. I stepped over the fallen barrier. The thin layer of snow covering the concrete was only a few centimeters deep, enough to leave a trace. And I saw them. Tire tracks, they were deeply etched. They did not swerve. There were no signs of sudden braking or attempts to turn around. They just went straight. My heart hammered against my ribs. I followed them. My flashlight swept back and forth, illuminating only a small circle in front of me. The wind whistled in my ears. The pier seemed endless in the darkness. I could hear the sound of ice cracking somewhere far out on the lake. The tire tracks continued straight ahead. I reached the edge of the pier, where the concrete ended and the darkness began. I stopped. I didn't want to go further. I knew what I would see. I knelt down, then lay prone. The cold concrete pierced through my jacket. I held the flashlight out in front of me, shining it down into the void. The ice had shattered. It wasn't a crack, it was a hole, a black, jagged hole of sharp ice fragments. The water beneath was pitch black, reflecting the weak light from my flashlight like a glass eye. The tire tracks went straight into it. The car had driven right through here. I don't know how long I lay there. I couldn't move. I just stared at the hole. I pulled out my phone. My hand shook so much I almost dropped it. I called 911. I don't know what I said. I think I screamed. I gave the address. I said the pier. I said the hole. I sat in my car, turning the heater up to maximum, but I couldn't stop shaking. I stared at the fallen barrier until flashing blue and red lights appeared in the snow. The next morning, everything felt surreal. The sun was shining, but there was no warmth. The pier was cordoned off. There were many vehicles, police cars, fire trucks, and a gigantic yellow crane slowly moving into position. They called me the witness. They asked me to stay behind the yellow tape. They brought sonar equipment. They lowered something into the hole. A man in a thick uniform looked at a screen. He nodded. They had found it. The car was about 50 yards from the pier at a depth of 15 meters. 2 divers in thick protective gear. They looked like astronauts preparing to enter another world. They checked their air tanks, put on their masks. They walked to the edge of the hole and disappeared beneath the black water. The waiting was the worst part. There was no sound but the wind and the idling engine of the crane. Everyone spoke in whispers, if they spoke at all. I stood there. I didn't feel cold anymore. I didn't feel anything. I was just a pair of eyes staring at the ice surface. They took a long time. Finally, one of the divers surfaced. He signaled. The crane roared, a thick cable went taut, the water in the hole began to churn. It rose out of the water, slowly. The dark blue sedan. It no longer looked like a car, it was a block of distorted metal. Icy water poured out of every crevice. The driver's side window was shattered. They pulled it onto the pier. The sound of metal grinding on concrete made my stomach clench. They had to use hydraulic tools to open the door. One of the rescue workers looked at me. He seemed about to say something, perhaps to tell me to turn away. I shook my head. They brought her out. She was wrapped in a black body bag, but I saw it. I saw her gray hair matted to her forehead. The police chief came to me. He took off his hat. He spoke of a tragic accident. He said she might have been disoriented in the snowstorm, mistook the pier for a road. It happens sometimes to older people. I nodded. I didn't hear what he was saying. Then another officer handed me a clear plastic bag, her personal belongings, house keys, a few crumpled dollars, and her cell phone. It was damaged, waterlogged, but they retrieved it from the car. I took the bag. I left town right after the funeral. I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't look at the lake. I was driving through Ohio when I stopped at a gas station. I cleared the trash out of my car, fast food bags, empty coffee cups, and my mother's plastic evidence bag. I intended to throw it away, but something stopped me. I took out the phone. It was dead, but as I held it under the gas station light, something was revealed. The screen was cracked, but the exterior protective glass held onto the last image, like a fossil. The last application she used was the map. It still showed on the dim screen. A route had been set. The starting point was our house, and the destination. The destination was a red dot, blinking, located in the middle of Lake St. Clair. I stood there beside the gas pump, stunned. The horror I realized was that my mother knew exactly where she was going, and she drove straight towards it without hesitation.